everybody. This is Ty Givens, and I am going to introduce you guys to something a little bit different than what we normally do. So, you know this podcast as CX Collective in the Zone, but I've decided that it's time to probably rebrand and actually talk to you about things that I think you already know. So, the idea is that we're going to call it, first of all, what you already know. And secondly, I'll be introducing you to different people who do different things that you probably have misconceptions about. Because that is just the world that we live in. And our first guest for this newly rebranded podcast is Ariana Cofone. Ariana,
Hi.
why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, Ty, I'm so happy to be here. And I feel like so fortunate. I'm the first one with the rebrand. Um, so my name's Ariana Cofone. I am an operations nerd. My day-to-day is I'm a fractional chief operating officer with different companies around the world. I also do operations advising. And I am the host of the Secret Ops podcast, which uncovers the world of operations. And that's where I met Ty, is getting to interview her on that podcast. So now we're doing a bit of a switcheroo, which is so fun because we just had a blast the first time. So we had to do it again.
Definitely. It was a lot of fun. Like, I laughed a lot. I might still have a little rasp in my voice. Maybe I'm changing and becoming smoldering or something. But when I listened to it, I was like, you could hear like the rasp. I was really tired, but I'm back in my home office today. So I'm so excited to interview you and to talk to everyone about operations as a general practice. But I think the first thing is that we have to define operations. So how would you define operations? What is operations, I guess?
Yes, I will straight up tell you, it took me a long time to figure out how to succinctly define it because it just manifests in so many different ways based on the industry and what you're doing. So the simplest way I've been able to define it, it's the fusion of people, process, and technology fueled by data. So it's those three things. And then if you throw some data into it, that's where operations lives.
Gotcha. I use the term and I use that people process tech a lot in the work that we do for CX because I like to say that we are CX operations people. And I think by the way that you've defined operations, I think that that's absolutely true. I know that in my space, there's so many misconceptions about like what is customer experience, what is customer service. Um, it's also undervalued a lot. What's it like in operations? Like, what are some of the misconceptions that people have about what you do?
Oh, this is where I said I'm going to get on my little soapbox here.
Oh yeah,
I would say the biggest misconception for me is that operations is synonymous with process. Um, and I think it freaks people out because you've got a lot of people in a business that don't like process. They maybe don't even like structure. And so immediately operations, they're sort of keeping it at arm's length. But operations really for me is about how do we get humans to do their best work possible and to make the business run in the best way. So that misconception, I think, really prevents people from accepting and getting excited about operations and honestly thinking it is like a sexy thing. Like most people are like operations, dry, bland. It ain't sexy. But I think when you have well-running operations, you don't even notice it. Just like CX operations, right? If it's good, it just works.
yeah.
So that's, I think, the first misconception. And I think the second misconception for me is that operations tends to be an afterthought. So you sort of put a lot of weight behind sales, you put a lot of weight behind product, and then operations. You sort of start to think about when everything's breaking and it's a shit show. That I think is the big misconception, and actually, unfortunately, is an issue with businesses because they're not thinking about, hey, how do I build the machine while I'm building all these other pieces? So operations is not an afterthought. It's actually part of the planning process. It's part of the success as a business. So those are the two main conceptions that I see that I'm trying to rewrite.
Okay, so this is enlightening for me. I always say that there are things that that I think I already know, right? And but there's probably some terminology or some structure behind it that I just haven't learned yet. And so as a person, I saw operations and processes like being married almost, right? Because in my mind, I'm thinking in order to have a well oiled machine, you have to have processes. Now, here's what's weird about me. I'm process. I don't really love them. I like to
Totally.
implement them, but and it depends on size and scale of team. But like, I feel like sometimes processes will stifle creativity,
Mhm.
right? Um, and if you have a process that's so cleanly documented like we do, because that's what we do, um, it will take away a person's ability to see if there's a problem because they're going to be
Mhm.
like, well, I followed your process, right?
Totally.
What in operation, since it's not process, what, like, how do you create that structure, that organization, if without being focused on process?
A process is a component to operations always,
Mm.
but it's like with customer experience, we have to think about the customer first. And a lot of the times for operations, the customer is the internal team. So
Gotcha.
we've got to think about how do we meet our team where we're at to one, give them clarity on what to do, but also two, give them the freedom to solve problems in a human way. So
Yeah.
the worst part is when you just have a checklist and you just have people following a checklist and then one day somebody's like, "Why do we do this?" and nobody knows why.
Yeah.
Right? That just again, like that ends up wasting time. It ends
Mhm.
up getting people to not think outside of the box to prevent problems before they see them. So for me, operations, first and foremost, you've got to meet people with where they're at and what they're doing in the job
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
understand the ins and outs. The goal is if I'm doing my job well with operations, I can empower the people doing the job to solve their own problems. And I'm just guiding them with best practices at a high level. But there's no way I can intimately know how they do what they do because I'm not in their shoes, but I can help guide them. So that's where I typically start is like, let's get into the mind of the person that's doing the task. How can we best give them the tools and the space to do what they do? Then that's when you start to standardize, right? Once you start to trial out different ways and approaches, that's when process comes in. That's when standard operating procedures and technology and automations and all of those things come in. But it always has to start with the people and solving those people problems. Because that also comes into, if you think about people problems, then we get into employee retention. If
Mhm.
somebody doesn't like what they do, they ain't going to stay around for very long.
True.
Right. So if you can sort of solve both of those problems simultaneously, get them to enjoy their work more and get them to be more engaged in what they're doing, it ends up just carrying through the business, is what I've seen.
That makes a lot of sense. So, okay. Thinking about, because I'm always in the CX place. I'm always looking at everything from
Yeah.
that perspective, right? The so in CX, a lot of times, uh and I'm trying to remember who I was talking to. Whoever it was, they were to my right. That's funny. I literally remember saying
You
to
see
my right.
them? They're
Like, I
there.
said this to whoever. Um must have been in Vegas. Um that and yes, it was. The lady who was on the panel with me, she had sales for Twilio,
Mm,
for their internal sales team, I believe. And we were talking about how, or actually, she brought up how in her world, a lot of times, the employees, it's their very first job. And
mm.
I was like, yeah, that's true because, I used to, here I go telling my age. I used to work at Walden Books. That was like my favorite job ever when I was, 18 years old. And then my boss there encouraged me to go and go to this job fair with her, which I love her. I still am in touch with her
So
to this day.
amazing.
And I'm grateful to her because she pushed me, right? So we go to this job fair. I get hired. I was at Office Depot in their corporate doing call center work, right? It was my first grown up job, my first full time job. I didn't know how to be an employee at work. So I think in those kinds of environments, you have to define the process for those types of employees because they don't know
Definitely.
what they don't know. They're just walking in. But what is the pathway in operations? If you're giving people the opportunity to kind of like find their way, where do they start? And, and like what kinds of opportunities exist within the ops world?
It's a great question. And also probably good that I context that for me, I focus on small to medium sized businesses.
Mhm.
So, I'm dealing with high growth, needing to scale
Yeah.
quickly, where I'm already coming into a team that is operating in an okay way-ish, but
Okay.
they're trying to figure out their next stage, right? Like once you get to large companies, process, scale, like all
Yeah.
of that has to be
Exactly.
down to a T, because that comes down to consistency, right? And having the right and the same experience across your business. With operations, first of all, people who fall into operations tend to be incredibly curious and they want to just solve things. And so they're
Hmm.
like, where do I go? Because I'm not fitting here and I'm not fitting there. And then we sort of just take them under our wing in
Okay.
operations. We're like, all right, we can hone this somewhere. Where I start with people that are early in their careers is I do a lot of show and telling.
Okay.
So a lot of it is like, all right, what is the problem that we're facing? Here's two approaches that I've seen work in the past. Here's how I've delivered that process. Why don't you pick one to try it and let's see if that works?
Mm.
So I like to show initially and get them to understand why you do one or the other. And then I just give them a lot of those until I would say probably 3 months in,
Mm.
they sort of can start to predict those things.
Okay.
That's when I start to give more freedom, which is instead of saying, here's choices A, B, which one would you pick? I start to say instead, okay, how would you approach this? From the knowledge of what we've done and what you've created in the past with standard operating procedures, with the integrations and those automations, how would you approach this problem that we're dealing with? That's when you start to get more strategic. And that's really what I'm looking for in operators, is that ability to make the leap from doing into strategically
Mm.
applying it and figuring out those puzzles. Now, some people will always be doers, and we absolutely need that. They want to check their boxes, they want to
Yeah.
make sure everything is perfect.
Yeah.
For me, being in business operations, I need people that think strategically,
Yeah.
because that's how you see problems before they're in front of your face. So that's how I start to train and mentor younger operators. And then I just kind of see what works for them. Some end up becoming way more technical.
Hmm.
Some of them become more people focused. Some of them love a standard operating procedure. They love a process, and that's their happy place. So they'll make a wiki, they'll make a knowledge base, like that'll be their spot that they own. Really though, it starts with show and tell, and then talk me through what you're seeing. How would you go about solving this problem? And that's where you can kind of see where they'll end up fitting.
I love that. I a couple of things I wrote down while you were talking because I was like, ooh, ooh, ooh. One one thing I say all the time is that I was 24 years old, and I was doing workforce management. I was adding to it, and 24-year-old, manager. I used my air quote fingers. I had a team. It was a great opportunity, a great experience. What I realized though is my boss used to critique me for not being a strategic thinker.
Mm,
And so you just kind of laid out one of the things that I believe, which is you cannot set a strategy for something you've never seen. So,
1000%. And that
right?
expectation is so unrealistic because
Yes.
you're coming out of school, you have to actually fail or
Yeah.
succeed to start learning those strategies. So, how do you create an environment for people to learn
Yeah.
where the failures aren't so big? They can learn and get up and go and keep moving. Yeah, I totally feel you on that.
And I felt like I was a failure because I wasn't strategic. But what I realized is like, what am I creating a strategy for? I've never actually walked this path. So
Totally.
you just validated me. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Your
The other
24-year-old
question,
self thanks you.
yes, hello. The other thing is we've talked about people and process. Let's talk about the role of tech and
Mm.
operations. How does that fit in? Where does the ops team like sit in the tech spectrum, if that makes any sense?
Yes, I think it depends on the operational role. So I'm more of a generalist because I'm business operations. So I'm looking end to end at how the business is running versus some people in operations, they specialize in one thing, like revenue operations or sales ops or financial ops, right? And they're much more niched. So for my higher level end to end, what I'm looking at with technology really starts with how the data is coming through the business. So I need to see, hey, where does data start? Where does it go through our entire pipeline? Where does it come out? How do we need to maintain it? And then gets to the question of, all right, what's the right platform for us to start to collect that data and integrate that data into different parts of our business?
Mhm.
So it annoyingly starts with the boring stuff. It
Okay.
always starts with like, what data are we collecting? And you've got to just like map it out, write it down, try and figure all that out. And then you've got to figure out, okay, do we have a highly technical team? Can we do like some crazy stuff with this? Do I have access to that? Or am I at a small startup where every single piece of technology that we're using is a major cost for that business? And I'm
Mhm.
looking for more of a catch all general tool instead of a bunch of specialized niche tools.
Mhm.
So for me, it's really starting with how can we work with that data in a smart way? And then comes the tools. The interesting part is the landscape of tools have changed so much in the last 5 years. A lot of them do the same thing,
Mhm.
and people have strong opinions on them. And of course, I've got my favorite tools that I love to use, but you don't have the standouts in the same way that you did maybe 3 years ago, where it's like, here's the one tool that you use. A lot of them are doing the same things. So you just have to find the right tool for the business, for the data collection, and for the people, and then train the heck out of them, right?
Mm.
Really, really get them to own that tool. And that's a hard part. Adoption, as I'm sure you know from your experience, is the hardest bit of the
Yeah.
process.
Okay, this helps because what I am not good at is any type of sales, but because I, am responsible for bringing in business for my company, I have to put on a sales hat. And and so it's got me thinking about like talking to more operations people about customer experience specifically.
Yeah.
Um in that though, when you're talking about identifying the process, I 100% believe, support what you're saying as far as like letting tech be the last thing that you look for, because it has to be a solution to everything that you found. I think a lot of times what we find is that businesses make the decision on a tool, and then they want to fit their processes into the tool,
Yes. Yeah.
and when it doesn't work, they're like, there's something wrong with the tool. It's like, well, not really.
Yeah. They're like, this sucks. And you're like, well,
Yeah,
we didn't really.
it's got its limitations, right? Like every tool has
Yeah.
its limitation. And like you said, they, for the most part, a lot of them do the same things. Now, I have I have this firm belief, because we work with so many tools. I like to work with, which I don't think my team loves, but I have a lot of different small tools that I use because I want the best tool for that process as opposed to a general tool for all processes. What's your thought on
Totally.
that? Because we kind of touched on that a little bit.
Well, I think truly it depends on what you're doing. I mean, you're dealing with large scale implementations
Yeah.
where those nuanced tools save time, money, give you analytics that you're looking for. That's necessary. Whereas in smaller businesses, if you overcomplicate too much, then I just feel like you
Yeah.
lose adoption, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
That's where you go with more of the catch-all tools because you don't have the budget. People just aren't seeing why the value add is there, and it might not be there. The cost might not outweigh the value that's being brought in for a certain size business. So I think for the things that you're implementing, it does make sense. And you do have to find those Goldilocks tools that
All the
are the
time.
ideal thing, right?
Yeah.
For me, I'm like, all right, we could use Asana, we could use Notion. Right now, I'm just getting a team used to having structure in a way that they can approach.
Yeah.
And then as long as the data is centralized in the way that we're working, we can take that to new tools and we can migrate to different things in a year from now when we grow.
Yeah.
So I feel like you're tackling such niche special problems with CX. And
Yeah, it's different. I mean, we know the landscape of tools. We just did you touched on something that was important too. We did a migration just last night, and
yeah, I was
like,
feeling for you on that.
oh
Been
my
there.
gosh. And it was 12 hours, one client, like throughout the day, but like I'm still recovering. But I mean, it's a wonderful client, so it's okay. And shout out to Alessandra and Jordan and Dana right now, who are like holding down the fort while I'm here. So I appreciate them. Um, with the deployment, so adopting tools is a big thing. So we started off
Mm,
with we did training in two different groups, and the trainings ran about 4 hours, right? And this is like walking them through like really we try to focus on making sure that they understand what they're doing, And then like, how does the customer get in touch? Oh, you can see how a ticket comes in now. Okay, now let's go on the inside. Let's get a feel for the way that things are organized. Let's show you how to use every aspect of this product. And it took a long time. But at the end, we got this lovely message from the client who was like, thank you so much for this. Almost 10 o'clock last night, I'm recording a video like, okay, day one, new system. This is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm keeping an eye on their queue, even though I'm here, because that's just, it's just who I am.
Totally.
And they look so good. I'm so proud of it. Do you have, I like to also talk about failures though, because I've messed up a lot of things in the past, hence why I can build strategy now. Like, what are some of the operational failures that you've experienced? It doesn't have to be firsthand, something you've witnessed in your
I
history.
would say the biggest operational personally is, I think early on in my career, I thought my way was the best way for a long time.
Oh, you are talking my language. Okay, sorry. I had to just jump in.
I knew you were going to be on this. I thought that my approach was obviously the best way. Like, of course we would approach it this way, right? So naive, right? In retrospect, you can approach problems and solutions in so many different realms. And it's about, for me, learning to have the testing phase of any process or platform that you're trying out. Yeah. So what I do now to buffer my ego, I guess, is I say, listen, we're going to prototype what our process is or what technology and how we're going to use it. We're going to prototype it. And then I'm going to throw it to the team to stress test it and give me all of their feedback on it. And then I'm going to fix all the things that were wrong and messed up. And then we're going to implement it. And guess what? We're going to continue fixing things and refining things until it really works. Yeah. That approaching it with that mentality has really helped I know the right way mentality.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because sometimes you think you do, and then, you've done it a dozen times, but you're going to work with a team that just doesn't work with that. They just don't jive. They hate a platform. They like in-person meetings, and this asynchronous platform it just doesn't work for them. Yeah. So operations is not just about making the best operations, but making the best operations for the people that it's serving. So that's been the challenge. And a lot of it does come down to ego and letting go of it and just saying, no, I'm going to learn through you testing this and giving myself that grace and that space to be wrong, and having then a good sense of humor about it, right? Like, for me, everybody approaches their job differently. For me, without a good sense of humor, I would lose my mind. Like, you have to.
Or you're going to cry. It's one or the other.
Been there too. Yep.
Yeah. And you're right. Like, so moving from like running teams like in office as an employee to moving into this consulting space, I went through the same thing you did, where it was like, I thought I knew. Now I'm so much more open. And so with my team, we have to go through that same thing where maybe that's not how we would do it, but we don't have to do it that way. That's what works for them. And so what we have to do is kind of like, we have to make the best outcome for that client, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm literally sitting biting my tongue because I've spoken my piece about how I feel about a certain thing.
Yeah.
And then once you speak your piece, then it's time for the team to weigh in and make a decision. And then you're going to do your best. Like, I can't control that, right? Especially somebody who's coming in as a fractional leader. Yeah. Ultimately, I'm helping to support you, and you're probably going to know best because you're doing this, for 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years longer than I am. But then there are the moments when those things backfire, and then it's a lesson. It's a learning lesson for everybody involved. And just, all right, well, here's what I saw. Here's why I was recommending those things, but we're here now. What do we do next?
Yep.
That's key too, is that if something doesn't work that you sort of flagged, again, just, it's a learning, let's move forward instead of being like, I told, like that doesn't help.
You cannot do the I told you so.
That helps nobody.
Let it go.
That helps nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody does. And it doesn't make you feel good at all. Like, it just doesn't make you feel good, because ultimately you and I are driven to help people. Yeah. So that doesn't help them, right? That just makes them feel small, and it's unnecessary.
Nobody wants that. I know our
Yeah.
client we're working with now, they're so grateful because they appreciate, they call it patience. I think it's more understanding that none of us know what we don't know what we don't know. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And like the world of customer service has evolved so much to the fact that now people are calling it customer experience. I know I've talked to a few people from like my past who are transitioning into like this new world. So like the customer service manager of the early 2000s is not the head of CX in the 2020s. And that skill set, there's a huge gap between that world and the world that we're in today.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I recognize that. And so when I'm talking to leaders who've been at a company for a decade, being within a company for a decade can really, you have blinders on when it comes to like what does CX look like today in the rest of the world. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or your skill set. It just means that things have changed. Whatever tools they're using, they've been using. So you have no idea that the landscape looks different.
Well, and I can speak truly to this. So my first like proper job full time
Mhm.
was as a customer service manager, and
Yay! Woo!
so I come from that world. I've it's a hard world. It is
Yeah,
a crazy world because you're dealing with people and everybody's different. You can't control people, right? So
so true.
customer service is so challenging.
Yeah,
But I will say the people in that industry, if they've been in that world, wow, they're badass. They're amazing because they know how to navigate things in such a beautiful way. I will say though, knowing that that was my first job and then knowing where I am today, the big piece that I didn't have at that time was an understanding of how technology played into this whole thing.
mm,
I did not have an understanding of that, right? Like I was very people oriented, very process oriented, but I didn't have that technology piece.
yeah,
And if I were to give anybody, I guess, my 2 cents, technology is changing very quickly. It's incredibly overwhelming to keep up, but you
yeah,
have to try. You have got to try
yeah,
because unless you keep up with what's happening or at least have an eye on what's going on, you're going to be missing a whole toolbox to be able to solve problems, lead your teams, and just honestly live a good day to day life in your job.
yeah.
But that's easier said than done. I will say though, I speak from experience. I wasn't a technology person. I could barely use a remote. About 8 years after I was in that customer service role, I went to code school and I learned full stack web development. Again, incredibly humbling because it's hard. Now, though, I see the world differently. I have different tools at my disposal to solve problems, and that is empowering. Like, nobody can take that away from me. But I had to go through that really hard phase. So, that's what I would encourage people to do. As I'm sure with all the work that you all are doing at CX Collective, tools are constantly, like you just talking about having those niche tools for things,
Yeah,
finding that right, perfect thing,
yeah,
that takes caring and learning constantly.
yeah. You cannot get comfortable.
You
Um,
cannot get comfortable.
Constantly uncomfortable. That's how you know you're growing.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
So, okay, I want to talk a little bit more about like what you do. Like, so for people who are listening who are like, oh my gosh, our operations are on fire. I wish that I had Ariana. I wish she could come here and fix it. My first question to you is like, what does an engagement look like with you? How do you set those up? And
Yeah.
what is it like? And how long do they typically last? What is it like to work with you?
That's a great question. I would say so. I've learned over time the best way to approach this because I span so much across the business. I always start with an operational assessment to
Okay.
assess all of the high level aspects of the business. And what that does for me, I've created a little scoring system, but what that does is that gives me a high level overview. And every client like scores differently. Different parts of their business are developed at different levels,
Mhm.
but it also gives me the risks that I have to address immediately. So
Okay.
I always start with the assessment. That gives the client visibility into what's going on. That gives me an understanding of what would need to be tackled first. And then usually they bring me on as either a fractional COO if they need really hands on support to
Mhm.
implement that assessment.
Mhm.
Or if, let's say, they're doing amazing and they just need some guidance through a tricky phase in their development as a business, then I come on as an operations advisor to help guide and to say, all right, I fell in that pit before. Avoid this, instead
Yeah.
do this, or you're missing this piece. But that's typically what that looks like. And then it depends on the client. Usually fractional work, somewhere between 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
Operations advising can be a little bit longer because it's lighter touch. But once you have that understanding of the business, you have a shorthand of talking about how to take the business. So that's where I really get to work with phenomenal clients, where it's like, okay, great. A year ago, you had no structure, no this, no this. You didn't have the insurance. You didn't have your financial. You didn't have all these things. Now we're at this point and we're just like putting the cherry on top. We're just fine tuning all of this. It's the yummiest. The day that they say they don't need me is like the best day. That means that I've done my job and they can do their thing, you know?
I don't know. I don't know if we are like cousins in another life or something, but we're so aligned. I always say like we we have the most interesting business model because my goal is to help you for a period of time.
Yes,
And I love to solve new problems, but we're just not built to kind of stick around for, I'm not going to create anything new for you to be worried about. I'm going to be like, let's just like fix this. Call me if you need me. We have
yeah,
clients who have called us for 5, 6, 7 projects because they'll be like, hey, we need help
amazing.
with this. I'm like, great, let's go. We jump in, we do it, we walk away, they come back. That's wonderful. We also have clients who've been with us for a couple of years now, and that's great too, but we're always solving new problems. It's never
Definitely.
that we're redoing something because we didn't carry it through, if that makes any sense.
1,000%. You come in to
Yeah.
solve a problem and to make something work better than
Yeah.
when you came upon it. Like that's my goal too.
Mhm.
Um, I also usually prepare businesses for hiring someone full time, right? That's where
Yes,
fractional, right? Like that's where
all
you
the
want to bring
time.
somebody in and like you're just trying to create that foundation where things are running smoothly
Yeah,
for them to then take it strategically and run in the future with it.
that's so
And that's
true.
something.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's something that I think is I realized in my career is I loved the yucky tangly bit,
Mhm.
and then I wanted to hand it off to
Yes.
somebody.
Yes, I get it. And then
Yeah.
I also think about when so for in CX specifically, it's a lot harder to find someone who can build a CX team that will scale than it is to find someone who can run a team. Do you guys have that same thing in the ops world?
Yes, I think that listen, there are a lot more people that like to check the boxes
Yeah.
than like to get in the weeds and solve the problems
Yeah.
because it's hard. And
Yeah.
honestly, sometimes you don't solve the problem. Like I hate to say that. Sometimes I always come in wanting to solve them, but sometimes the answer is yeah, this needs to remain manual for now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is just like
It is
because if
what it
I
is.
it is what it is. We could create this whole gymnastics craziness, but like it's going to be more to maintain than if you just did your own thing. Um but I will say there's also certain phases with clients that I work in, right? So when they get to a certain stage where they're going to be in that stage for a couple of years, it's a perfect time to bring in somebody for that phase.
Yeah.
But then once they grow to a certain stage, or let's say they want to get funding, then sometimes you have to bring in a different kind of specialist in
Hmm.
operations to help you get to that phase where you can get funding. That's I think the key. If like you're a CEO or a founder of a business and you're thinking like, how do I implement operational support at different stages? Your business will need a different
Hmm.
strategic operational eye,
Yep.
and feel free to look for that and pursue that. Sometimes having the same operator for a decade actually doesn't make sense because
Yeah.
you've grown to the point where their skills maybe aren't applicable in the same way that they were in year two. So it's a challenging conversation to have. Not saying that they can't grow with the company, but always bringing in new knowledge, always bringing in people to help you at the stage where you are with
Yeah.
operations is key.
Yeah. Or if they have that long tenured employee, call Ariana because guess
Yeah.
what? She can help modernize their skill set. You see how that works?
And I don't know about you. I love mentoring people within the operations space. Like it is such a joy for me to be like talking to another operator and getting
Mhm.
them up to speed with where I think the business is strategically. Like I have so much fun in that because they feel again like a sibling almost. You know,
Yeah.
you're in the same
Yeah.
wheelhouse and you're just kind of catching them up with the things that you've learned through your experience. And guess what? They're teaching you too, right? Like I am always learning from them. So that's part of, I think, more of the operations advising, is being able to come in and hold people's hand into those
Yeah,
transitions and get an internal team into that new phase.
I love it. All right. Can you tell us a little bit about the Secret Ops podcast?
Yes. Well, first of all, listen to Ty's episode. She's phenomenal. Um, I really loved our episode because of how much knowledge you shared. It's just phenomenal. Anyway, Secret Ops is a podcast uncovering the world of operations. And it was inspired because I've worked in operations for over a decade. And I'm constantly getting asked the question, like, what is operations? Like, what do you do exactly? And I realized I'm not solving my own problem by talking about what we do as operators. So I wanted to start a podcast that would uncover that for people and show all the different specializations and approaches and options that you could approach operations with. So we have everyone from COOs, director of operations, revenue operations, CFOs, we have program managers. We've got product ops that are coming on. We've had a chief of emergency medical services.
Oh,
So
wow.
like, yeah, because every role within operations touches a lot of different parts of businesses. You can learn from that. So that's the whole point, is just to make you a better operator in your business and in your life through hearing through other people's experience.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
All right, I have you one thing you did with or did with me when I was there is you asked me some rapid questions. I don't have anything really
Yeah.
prepared, but I
That's
will
all
tell you
right.
this. Last time we met, I was binge watching Golden Girls. I got through all of it. It
How
was
was it?
amazing. It was
Did you
so
cry
good.
at the
Like,
last episode? Was it emotional? I haven't watched it all the
you
way through.
know, it was emotional because it's like the end of an era.
Yeah.
But they had I didn't know they had a spinoff, a show
Oh, I
called The
didn't know that.
Golden Palace that was because the show ended because B. Arthur didn't want to continue. And so they did a spinoff
Interesting.
called The Golden Palace, and like Don Cheadle was on there. And I can't call the
What?
guy's name, but from Cheech and Chong, he was on there. And it was so well done, but it only lasted one season. And I was like, people from the early 90s, like, who wasn't watching this? It was hilarious. It was so good. And she was definitely missed as a part of the cast, but she did like a cameo and they were able to carry it pretty well. But I loved it. I got through season one of that, and I think maybe the last one wasn't as sad because I knew that there was like another continuation, and because they didn't go past season one, there was like no sad ending. They never got like a finale,
Mm.
so it just kind of like ended.
That's
Yeah,
it's a little part of me is like, oh, that's great because they sort of live on as characters in your head. And part of me is like sad that there's not a conclusion, that it
yeah,
comes to. It's
yeah.
a bit of bittersweet either way.
It is. It is. So I'm done watching that. I haven't found anything to binge watch. So what are you watching so I can get some ideas?
Okay. So I binge watched recently The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which
I'm in the middle of that. I'm writing it down so I can pick it back
go
up.
I had the same thing as you. I'd watched the first two seasons, but I had caught up and then they released other seasons. So I started from the beginning again. It is phenomenal. It's just so
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
The acting, the performance. I come from a theater background, and to see television and theater happening almost simultaneously in front of me, it was like just candy to my eyes and my brain. It was phenomenal. And the thing that I love that it captured, especially as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
is the push and pull of wanting to have that career, wanting to have those ambitions, but also wanting that family. And how do you make those worlds exist together? And
Yeah.
like, what do you do when people challenge you around that?
Yeah.
It's done so beautifully, so hysterically.
Yeah.
The actors are incredible. The cast is phenomenal. I would just highly recommend that. It's a 10 out of 10. And I will say the full series end to end, it's yummy. I was not disappointed in
I'm
the
gonna
whole
turn.
arc.
I'm actually gonna start from the beginning.
Yeah.
What's today? Oh, what is my show? The Gilded Age.
Oh, I haven't seen that. Is it the
It,
next season back on?
it's the second season has just started. The first season I watched last year sometime, and then I just rewatched it just to get ready. So I don't feel like that's a same kind of binge because I've already seen it. I just had to get ready, but I forgot that season two started. If you like Downton Abbey or
Yes.
any type of period, stories like Gilded
That's the
Age
one to
is
do it.
amazing. It's good.
Before I forget too, I'm watching A Lesson in Chemistry on Apple TV with Brie
Interesting.
Larson.
Okay.
It's really good. My
Is
husband
it?
and I, we wait for every episode to come out.
Wow.
And I was, I'm just gonna say I was like a mess. Like I'm very emotionally into it. So I would give it a chance. If you've seen it and you're like, oh, should I try? Give it a shot. It's
Did you
really
watch
interesting.
Severance?
Oh, yes. Phenomenal.
Yes. I'm waiting for Severance to come back.
Oh my God.
We were like that with Severance. It was just like we watched the first two episodes and we were like, what did we just watch? But we also couldn't look away.
Oh, 1000%.
So
Also,
good.
the soundtrack is like the chaotic jazz soundtrack. Like everything
Yeah.
about it is so good.
So
That
well done.
aesthetically, it's just pleasing to look at too, as
Yeah.
well. Like
Yeah.
it scratches this part of my brain that is like, "Ooh, this is new. What am I
Yeah.
seeing?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's an excellent show.
it is.
All right. So I used to read a lot and I stopped reading I'm gonna blame my iPad and phones and social media. That's what I'm blaming. And recently there was this book that I remembered from my early 20s that I wanted to revisit as a more mature woman. And so I actually grabbed it and I finished reading it in a week. And I was very proud of myself because I haven't sat down to read a book, like hold the book and turn the pages.
Mm.
That's what I'm doing on the personal side. On the business side, I'm starting to read a book that was recommended to me by a lady on the panel about marketing because marketing is not my forte. Are you reading any books right now?
Yes, I would say one that's worth mentioning is Rocket Fuel, that talks about the visionary and the integrator of the business that
Mhm.
usually is mimics as the CEO founder as the visionary and then the
Yeah.
COO as the integrator. Um, that has been incredibly informative for me. And I
Okay.
think just the dynamic, because operations and vision and sales, they go so hand in hand.
Yep.
I also really like they have an assessment in there that it shows you what percent vision versus what percent integrator you are.
Ooh.
It gives you a nice little piece of self-awareness as you're reading the book. So I would recommend that for sure. And it's not a terribly long read either. Like it's engaging.
You're taking me back to when I first launched, when I launched CXC, it was called the Workforce Pro. This was launched in 2016. So let's say this is around 2017. And there was a guy who has a marketing company and he was helping small businesses get government contracts or like local
Mm.
government contracts. And so I would go to the meetings and things like that. And so in conversation with him, he says, oh, like, I don't remember the term he used, but he has these categories that he puts people in. And basically, I'm going to say that he saw me as an integrator. And what's funny is that because I know how to make things happen, it is actually viewed as less than a visionary, which I find
Definitely.
very interesting because a person can have a vision and have no idea how to make it happen. But if you know how to make it happen, somehow you're not as valuable as a visionary. Do you experience that?
Mm, okay, let's pull out the soapbox again
Yep,
here for
let's
just a
go.
moment. This is the reason why I started Secret Ops as well. Outside of just helping people learn how to become operators in their life, I was so tired of people in operations behind the scenes not getting any recognition for the work that they're doing to actually make the vision come to life.
Yeah.
You have got to have that. It's not one or the other. You have to have both. And I just don't feel like it's weighted the same in the narrative of stories around business.
Yeah.
Like if you think about it, you think about the visionary, you think about Walt Disney, you think about what's his face? I've already tried to forget it. I've tried to forget the visionaries because I'm more interested in the people that are integrating
That are
into the
doing it.
business. Yeah, because of course you have to have the vision. Of course you have to have that. But you can't feasibly get there without knowing how to do the thing
Yeah.
or having the creativity to build it. And that's where maybe people look at what we do and they don't understand that a lot of it is actually quite creative, strategic
Yeah.
thinking. A lot of it is, the majority of it is when you get to a certain level.
And I will say that I see you as a visionary integrator. You have both.
Right back at you. Right
Yes.
back at you. Maybe that's why we vibe. Maybe that's why we're
Yeah.
cousins from
Yeah,
another life.
exactly. You can do both. And I think that makes you doubly excellent. I just say.
Oh, I feel the same way. When
um,
we on our episode with Secret Ops, I said this. I learned so much from your approach in talking about CX that I wanted to bring into operations because it was so grounded in just I don't know how to describe it, like humility, honesty, earnestness. Like I just loved that, and it's refreshing because it cuts through the noise of everything else. So I feel the exact same way about you.
oh man. Okay,
It's
I'm
true.
not gonna cry. I needed that
I'm not
pick me
crying.
up because I am excited. But you know what?
You had a migration day.
I
That's
had a
where you
migration.
order takeout. That's where you watch your
Oh, I
favorite
did.
things.
I did. I had really good food yesterday. I earned it. I
You
definitely
did.
earned it. Yes. This was so, I mean, just splendid. We're gonna have to do it again. I don't know. We'll find a reason because we just vibe like that.
Same.
Can you tell our listeners how they can find you and learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So if you want to learn about secret ops, you can go to www.secret-ops.com, or you can look on YouTube as well as anywhere that you find your podcast. As far as my work, you can find me on LinkedIn at Ariana Cofone, or you can find me on my website at www.arianacofone.com.
All right, and just so you guys know, Ariana is spelled with one N, so
One N. Yes,
ArianaCofone.com.
just like Grande,
Yeah.
not
Oh, I like
Huffington.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, there you go. There you go. Okay. Well, I have enjoyed you. I always do.
Same.
And I'm already looking forward to the next one.
Same. Ty, thanks for having me on. I'm so excited to be a part of the first episode of the revamp
Woo.
because I think people can really learn from all of this. And yeah, we'll talk very soon.
Definitely. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Oh, okay. I've
You make me laugh so much.